la la la. From the beginning of time, reaching out to the sublime in a cold and hostile world. We have struggled to exist in this earthly wilderness, seeking an elusive goal. Many times it seemed that we are fighting a hopeless cause, implying extinction is our lot. Because we were constantly ravaged by scourges and wars. We gripe, we quarrel and complain, but in the ending up, believe it or not, we will survive. No matter what the odds, man will survive. Inspired by our gods. It's a hard road we travel, but with triumph we shall. We gon' toil, we gon' struggle, cause at the end of it all, whether you're big or small, Peter helping Paul, till the master call, we fight for survival. Oh, yeah. In pursuit of happiness, searching for material bliss, we have toiled unceasingly, giving of our very best. In this never-ending quest, we have sought increasingly. Disappointed by our friends and betrayed by conjugal mates, surrounded by crime of every sort. Cruel never ends, and for us is a test of faith, emphasized by condemnation, penalized with retribution, but we will survive. Don't care what people say, I'm telling you, man will survive to see yet a brighter day. There's a mountain we're climbing, some will rise, some will fall. They'll be slipping and sliding, cause at the back of it all, metaphysical, deep and spiritual, till the master call, we fight for survival. Oh, yeah. Modern day societies, melting pot communities, there are several rules and laws, where the poor become subservient to the rich and affluent, or they show their fangs and claws. Divided by creed and race, it ain't easy to be free. No one knows for sure if we really can. can never find an equal place and live as one family. Sometimes it's hard to find solution, but nothing conquers the will of man. We will survive, though times may be rough. Man will survive. We know how to be tough. So let nothing divide we. All for one, one for all. Feel the power and the glory, cause at the back of it all. Though we whine and ball, broken down dance hall, till the master call, we fight for survival. Whoa! Hey, 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 yeah. Sometimes it's hard to find solution, but nothing conquers the will of man. We will survive, though times may be rough. Man will survive. We know how to be tough. So let nothing divide we. All for one, one for all. Feel the power and the glory, cause at the back of it all. Though we whine and ball, broken down dance hall, till the master call, we fight for survival. Whoa! Hey, 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 yeah. Ba-da-ba-da. Coming through the dark ages, looked upon as savages, haunted by unrighteousness. Time and place and circumstance, and some people's ignorance, we have to face all kind of prejudice. Subjected to slavery, bound by economic chains, quick to hold but slow to develop. Daunted by redundancy, plagued by emotional pains, still for all we wouldn't stop. Cry surrender or give it up, no. We will survive, as we have throughout the years. And we'll survive through pain, sorrow and tears, to ensure our existence, to walk proud, to stand tall, yet to humble in his presence, cause at the back of it all. Though we whine and ball, breaking down dance hall, till the master call, we fight for survival.
And a very good evening to you and welcome to Politics 101 on a Thursday evening. The maestro himself, Slinger Francisco, Dr. Slinger Francisco, the mighty Sparrow, song of survival and hope. Survival and hope. Man shall survive, we shall survive. Survival is in our social genes, because we have survived the worst. And we are here today to tell that story and to use that story of survival, that story of optimism to take us beyond another boundary, to paraphrase the indomitable philosopher of our time and times past, C.L.R. James. We survive, we have survived, and we will survive. Not just tapping into the survival of politics in the political arena or in the economic arena, but moving it to the very existence and survival of the human species, the human species. Man shall survive because mankind, he means, mankind has the capacity to resist. Mankind has the capacity to push back. Mankind has the capacity to move beyond boundaries so that we survive and we overcome. Man will survive. Man will always survive. There are some things that are inevitable because the human species is blessed with that capacity. Survival is inevitable. Survival is inevitable. And we have survived. We shall survive. Of course, we come on here tonight. Tinge of sadness is the world mourns the death of 67 people in that accident last night, Washington, D.C. Collision in the air, very rare because air travel is the safest form of transportation. But as happens so often in life, we go against the grain. And for those people whose bodies are submerged at the bottom of the Potomac River, we mourn with their families, and we remember that there may be some things that are beyond our ability to prevent, but there are things that are within our ability. We, of course, know not the hour. So let us make use of every minute of our existence on this earth to do not just for ourselves individually or for our families, but for the larger unit that allows the family and the individual to exist. We are the sum total of our families, our individuals, but our individuals and our families are shaped by the sum total. It is no accident that we say it takes a village to raise a family. We mourn the loss of those souls. We come tonight to continue our mobilization because we are constantly mobilizing to survive. We come tonight with all our hopes, with all our dreams, to mobilize to create a better country for our people. And if we create a better country, by extension, a better world. When Brother Vincent was here the last time, in his capacity as a commissioner at GCOM, the question of biometrics was high up on the agenda. He comes here a couple of weeks later, and the question of biometrics is still uppermost on the agenda. Tonight, Vincent is here again, and one of the most beautiful things is that in this time we have the media through which we can talk about what's happening at a place like GCOM. In the past, we didn't. We depended on the traditional media, on whether they want to cover it or not cover it. The state media versus the private media. Today, we are freed from that narrow media, and we have a wider media so that we can hear from the proverbial horse's mouth about what's taking place there that affects our lives. So, biometrics, biometrics, biometrics. And don't forget the voters list. And don't forget the voters list. How correct Vincent Alexander has been in these last 4 years. How correct he has been in these last 4 years. And the public record is there to show. Welcome to all of you. Those of you who are joining us from in Guyana or joining us from afar. Welcome to Politics 101. I think we are ready for Vincent, and let's go. Let's get the ball rolling. Vincent, good evening.
Good evening, David. Good evening. And good evening to your viewers.
And welcome again to Politics 101. We've been meeting up quite regularly. Only last night we met up when you were in another role, and we were talking about coalition politics. And as usual with our Guyana, what appears to be easier and straightforward to people in some societies is not as easy and straightforward for us in Guyana because of the complexity of our society. And of course, that would have come out last night as we attempted to really tease out coalition politics and the reality of our country. Any takeaway from last night?
Well, in terms of last night, clearly there are those who have moved away from the acceptance that we are a plural society with a system of majoritarian rule that does not provide for the inclusion of all of society in the decision-making process. To a point where they feel that, and I'm going to use the word which was used last night, that a particular party could assimilate people in it and become the global representative of the society, even though we continue to have
I think we're getting some bandwidth problem there.
Groups with different, and also on the political landscape. So I think we're at a point now where we're not necessarily facing truth. We are in many regards being very opportunistic and convenient about the politics of the country.
Thank you, Vincent, and I share those sentiments myself. I never thought that I would have used that A word, assimilation, in our Guyanese context. I've had to teach that for decades in America in talking about the American situation. I never thought that people who are sensible or bright would force me to use that word to describe the view of our reality. It is even more imperative that what is happening at GCOM be sorted out. So when you were here the last time, it was shortly after the Madam Chairman had given our verdict. on the use of biometrics. She had laid out a legal argument, and then she laid out a logistic argument, which taken together, she presented as a roadblock to the use of biometrics. Beneath all of that, the reading was that this thing may be correct. This thing may contribute to a credible election, but we are not going to use it because the law, the Constitution does not allow for it. And we don't, even if the Constitution allowed for it, we don't have time to do it. What has happened since that? What has happened at the level of GCOM since that pronouncement by Madam Chairman?
Well, let me first of all say that what one articulates is not necessarily what one believes, and one has to be able to determine the motive of people when they do or say things. And for all intents and purposes, I think that the argument that time is insufficient, it's an attempt to achieve a particular objective by giving what would appear to be a reasonable reason to the population. I have sought after them to, in some regards, to expose that maneuver. And how have I done that? Those of us who are aware of the decision, so to speak, would be aware that she had to admit that there is no impediment to the capture of fingerprints in the registration process. She had to admit that. Our arguments were so strong. The evidence was so much on our side that she had to come around to admit that. During the course of the prolonged discussion on the possible introduction, we had made the point that we should progress along a continuum. And the first element of that, the first stage of that continuum should be, do we agree in principle that we can and we need capture fingerprints and the use of digital fingerprints for identification purposes? You may or may not know that what has become public was the second version of quote unquote her ruling. Because in the first version, there was a clear omission of certain things which were put to the forum, to the commission. And so in the second version, one of those things was addressed. That is, whether or not there's an impediment to the capture of fingerprints in the registration process, irrespective of time. Can we do it? Do we in principle think it ought to be done? And in the second version, the first version ignored that. The second version, there was no pushback, and there was an acceptance which says, yes, we can. And so, testing the waters, what I have since done is to propose that without reference to a particular election, why not embark upon something that is good, that is useful, and that is doable? So I have actually put on the table the immediate implementation of the capture of fingerprints, even if it would not have the impact on 2025, but would have the impact on seeking to bring about a change in the regime of the administration of registration and ultimately on the administration of elections. Now, I made that proposition last week, Tuesday, I think it was. I made that proposition. Thursday, I reinforced the proposition, and the response of the chairperson was, I'll think about it. That was the response. I'll think about it. Therefore, this week, I asked, what have your thoughts been? And she said that she had not yet thought about it. So I said, well, when will you? And she attempted to not give a definite answer. And I insisted that given the nature of the matter, and given the previous contention that time was the problem, that we should not delay. We should make time a matter of essence. And from that perspective, we then got a response that next week she will share her thoughts on the matter. But it's becoming clearer and clearer that the reason given for not doing it was merely to find something that sounded plausible, because it is doable. The arguments against it cannot be sustained, but there are those who, in the discussions, did not want it to happen. And so, by whatever means possible, they were served up the decision in their favor. Though the decision does not follow on logically from their argument, it's served up the decision. So it's by any means possible to get the decision that you're looking
Do this for us, Vincent. Make a distinction between biometrics, as you've been arguing for, and others on the opposition side have been arguing for, and the capturing of fingerprint. I know they're related, but how different? How are they different?
for. Biometrics is a general term that speaks to the way in which physical features can be used for the purposes of identification. So that's basically what one talks about biometrics.
So fingerprint.
Fingerprints, iris, facial features, how those can be used for identification purposes. In the context of Guyana and the elections, there are two elements to that. One element is, how do we use the best approach for the capture of fingerprints so that our database has fingerprints that are good and perfect? So when we talk about biometrics in the context of the capture of fingerprints, we are talking here about the digital capture, not the manual capture. How do we use an electronic system to capture the fingerprints? And the big difference between the electronic system and the manual system would be, one, the manual system does not guarantee you perfect capture. And you only realize that you haven't got a perfect capture when you come to use the fingerprints. As we have experienced when we came to do cross-matching in 2019. The electronic capture of the fingerprints gives us perfect fingerprints because the electronic system rejects a fingerprint attempt if it is not perfect. So you are assured of a perfect fingerprint, and therefore the fingerprint can therefore serve the purpose intended, because a flawed fingerprint cannot serve the purpose intended. And let me again give the example of what we discovered when we were doing cross-matching. Cross-matching means that we have a database of all of the fingerprints of all of our registrants. And every time we add to that database new registrants, we match those fingerprints of the new registrants with the fingerprints in the database to ensure that the new registrants are not persons who are already on the database, and therefore to ensure that we do not allow duplicate registration. And what we discovered in 2019 and before was that with the manual fingerprints we were using, that because of the imperfection, bad capture of some of those manual fingerprints, we could not do 100% cross-matching of the new fingerprints with those in the database, and therefore we could not guarantee that there wasn't a duplicate registration. On the other hand, the use of the fingerprints serves the purpose of ensuring that when we have elections, that the person coming to vote is identified by virtue of those fingerprints. Meaning, we then have a system where that person places his hands, his fingers on a mechanism that provides for the fingerprints being placed on the mechanism to be checked against the system to see if those fingerprints represent fingerprints in the system. And if they represent fingerprints in the system, it therefore means the person who is presenting those fingerprints is someone who was registered, had his fingerprints captured and stored, and has now turned up to vote. If perchance those fingerprints do not represent fingerprints that are in the system, it means that that person who is seeking to present himself or herself is not a registered person and therefore is not entitled to vote. Or it can mean that that person has fingerprints which matches fingerprints in the system, but is not the person named. So you can come forward and you can say, my name is Vincent Alexander. We then put your fingerprints there, and what we expect is that the fingerprints of Vincent Alexander would come up. But if when we put your fingerprints and the fingerprints of Vincent Alexander do not come up, then though Vincent Alexander may be a legitimate name, it means the person presenting himself or herself is not Alexander, because those prints have not come up in the system. And so it's somebody who's trying to use an ID card, because that's what bears the name of someone else, to cast a vote. And so using the fingerprints for identification eliminates the possibility of someone who is not entitled by virtue of registration being able to vote, and also exposes someone who tries to use a name that's in the system, but a name that does not match that person by virtue of the person's fingerprints.
Vincent Alexander giving there a very long and detailed answer. So there are two options: a maximum answer, GCOM, which captures fingerprints and other forms of physical identification, and then we have the limited, which are the fingerprints. The GCOM chair said to do biometrics, time constraints, and biometrics cannot be used as the sole form of identification. So now Mr. Alexander has proposed a second limited form of biometrics, that is the fingerprints. And she has said she has to think about it.
Let me comment there immediately.
Yes.
What I have proposed is a partial implementation of the system, because in her ruling, she did not suggest anything that is an impediment to that aspect. And secondly, I have proposed it not necessarily in relation to the complete realization in 2025, but I propose it to show GCOM's commitment to doing something that can be done, that should be done, and that will eventually be the way it is completely done.
There you have it.
Testing the commitment of GCOM, given the ruling, which she sought to strike down this element and all elements on the grounds of time. And I'm saying, well, let's start it. And it's not about 2025. So we're not constrained by time of 2025, but we're showing a commitment. Let's start.
Let's start. Let's start. Got you. Got you. And that is the nuance there. It's not one as a replacement of the other. But let's start the process, and the process can be started with fingerprints. And let's see. Quite tactical. Oh boy. Vincent, they're working you overtime. I've never in all since this iteration of GCOM in time for the 1992 election, I've not seen I've known you for a long time and so on, and you've been around for a long time, so you don't need me to butter you up. But I've not seen a commissioner that has worked as hard, as you have, especially in the last, I was about to say the last couple of years, but really going back to 2000.
Let me butt in here and disagree with you.
Yeah.
I'm visible. And
yes.
So the public has knowledge of what's being done because I'm visible. I'm communicating with the public. But I must say that I'm not a single person. I work as a part of a collective. And that my colleagues, Corbin and Trotman, are equally a part of the work being done in determining how we go forward, what tactics we use, etc., what arguments we prefer. But they have given me the function beyond the work we do collectively of public communication. And so I am more visible than they are, but they are not less active.
Correct is right. Correct is right. And I should have known better than to venture into that area. Watch your mouth, David. You ought to have known better. Thank you, Vincent, for that correction. Vincent, since the last time, and I'm curious about this, and I want you to weigh in on it. GCOM put out a press statement. I think it was yesterday or the day before. Certainly, it was carried in yesterday's paper.
It was in today's paper.
In today's paper.
In Stabrook.
Yes, and I am curious why that press statement, and I think you hinted at it before. And I was on a program, I think, on Wednesday morning, and I was being asked about biometrics and GCOM. And I was making the point on that program that often in these issues, these large political issues, there is not a black and white. There is not a beginning and an end, but it's a process. And that GCOM has been forced to engage. It means that arguments are being made, pressure is being brought to bear, and that they are conscious that people are being mobilized, public opinion is being mobilized, and so forth. And the fact that GCOM is engaged, and you have already hinted about it when you talk about the first version and the second version. Locate that press statement by GCOM in the context of what I'm trying to place here.
The first thing I want to say, and this is not specific to that press statement, it is pertinent to all of the recent press statements. Because you know, GCOM was a shy organization in terms of press statements, very shy. All of the recent press statements, I would say, they are put out there as press statements of GCOM, but they do not reflect the collective will of GCOM. They reflect a majoritarian, they're like the electoral system. They reflect a majoritarian position rather than the collective will. Secondly, as I said earlier, GCOM has been press shy. And I may be more specific, the chairperson has been press shy. In recent times, in the commission, some commissioners have insisted that GCOM should put out press statements. In other words, you may have noticed in the past that there were letters in the press essentially coming from two commissioners giving different versions. One of the commissioners has insisted that it would be more effective and more credible if GCOM puts out a statement rather than having me write all the time. And so that commissioner has insisted, with some success, that GCOM should put out press statements. Those press statements, however, in their content, represents the position that those commissioners or that commissioner would have taken. And I repeat, that press statements issued by GCOM are not press statements representing the collective will of GCOM. They are press statements reflecting, to a large extent, the 4-3 position, where 4 dominate the decision-making and 3 are a minority. And so the statements really could be seen as a statement coming from 4 as opposed to 7. Now, again, those statements, in the context of what I just said, does not expose the public to the basis, the logic, and the way in which what was decided stands to reason in relation to what was not decided. It simply seeks to project what was decided and does not give the public an opportunity to look in and to exercise a judgment. So it is really not simply public communication. It is, to a large extent, propagandistic because it seeks to direct the mind of the public in a particular direction rather than to give them information for them to make a determination as to what they think is right as opposed to what is wrong. So it's highly propagandistic. And of course, it's going to be propagandistic. It was urged by those who are involved in the politics of propaganda. It was urged by them. And therefore, for all intents and purposes, it is now an extension of their propaganda.
An extension of their propaganda. What about the view that they are forced in many regards to respond to the, if you will, the pushback, the pressure that is coming from the large opposition and from the opposition nominated commissioners?
Of course, that's the motive. Really, I said it's propagandistic, but it's propagandistic against the background of trying to fashion the minds of the people, and therefore to obliterate the arguments, the contentions of the others who have spoken to this matter. So it's really an attempt to occupy the space in terms of the communication space. It's an attempt to control the thinking and the minds of others, and therefore to lend some degree of legitimacy to what they're doing. You know, in politics and even in law, you have on one hand something that is legal, and you have something that is legitimate and not quite the same. Something that is legal is done by you keep with the letter of the law. But something that is legitimate is something that's acceptable to the people at large. And so what we see in there is an attempt to create legitimacy for something that is not naturally legitimate because it's not illogical, it is not based on fact, it is not a one argument. It is a rule-based situation where four decides, no matter what you say, we prevail. But that may pass, quote unquote, in law. It does not make it legitimate. Because if the populists out there are still crying for something different, then the legitimacy is questioned. And the whole question of the democratic system, which says you have to be responsive to the people, also comes into play. And so here's an attempt to create a landscape where you are obliterating what the people call for and attempting to gain legitimacy by saying what you've put out there is in keeping with what the people want, having fashioned the minds of the people.
Vincent Alexander here tonight, dealing with the ongoing standoff between the commissioners at GCOM, on the one hand, the opposition nominated commissioners and the government nominated commissioners, and the standoff over the use of biometrics. And as we know, the chairman of GCOM has come down the side of the PPP nominated commissioners. And
David, allow me to elaborate a bit more on the question of legitimacy, because it's
yes, go ahead.
It's not a straightforward term. I'm going to use other examples to elaborate. In GCOM's employment process, we have criteria, qualifications, experience, etc., etc. I'll use those major two, qualifications and experience. I can give you, beyond question of doubt, the fact that when our DCO was appointed, he had not met the mandatory, the compulsory criterion in terms of the years of experience, had not met it. But that notwithstanding, there was a 4-3 decision that allowed someone who had not met the criteria to become legal. Now, given the fact that decisions are made by majority and all of that, the Commission has the authority to make decisions and the mechanism is a vote. One may argue, well, this is lawful. but it is not legitimate because though it is lawful, it flies in the face of the basis on which the decisions should have been made. It ignores, it is not transparent, it does not apply the rule the way the rule should be applied. But that's a weakness in our legal system, where authorities are able to make decisions. And once they are clothed with the authority to make decisions, there is no recourse to the court. And that's one of the, I would say, the weaknesses of our system. Constitutional bodies and so once a majority makes a decision, then you have difficulties in terms of going to the court. But I contend that those decisions, though quote unquote legal, are not legitimate because, first of all, they fly in the face of the factors that should have been used to make the decision. And secondly, they fly in the face of the people who do not accept those decisions because of the way in which they were arrived at. So our employment practices clearly shows that. And I'm just using that as an example to show that legitimacy has to do with acceptance. People do not, when something is legitimate, people don't continue to protest against it. Legitimacy of a government has to do with stability, that the people are comfortable, they don't say anything, and they allow what's happened to go through. Where you have people continuously crying out against what has occurred in a manner that requires that kind of propagandistic response that does not lend stability to our systems, then raises the question of whether or not what would have occurred is legitimate.
Thank you, Vincent, for that distinction between what is lawful and while it is lawful, it could also not be legitimate, which takes me back to a question that you have raised, an issue that you've raised, and that is the chair's interpretation or legal interpretation of the use of biometrics. And you may have done more than hint that you do not necessarily share that reading, that legal and constitutional reading of the issue. And you may have more than hinted that perhaps a judicial review of that reading by the chair is needed. And I have added on this program, and I'm sure others have, including you, that GCOM's role is to conduct election. It is not GCOM's role to determine the timeline for elections. The timeline that ultimately is not GCOM's role to determine funding for elections. There are the three branches of government. It's not GCOM's role to interpret the Constitution. They have three branches of government that deal with those. The judicial branch interprets the Constitution. The legislative branch makes law. And of course, the executive branch is there to run the day-to-day management. Those are not roles for GCOM. But the question I'm asking, tell us again, summarize for us the chair's ruling on biometrics and the Constitution, and why you do not necessarily share that ruling.
All right.
That interpretation.
There is a case, a superior case.
Yes, 1997, in the wake of the 97 election.
Which was determined by the said person.
Yes.
Singh, call it Singh. In which case, the principle that was articulated, that once someone has been registered and presents himself or herself to vote, you cannot require that person to have some additional process for the purpose of identification. The fact is that in the Essa Pereira scenario, people were registered. They had ID cards, which is evidence of them being registered. But the political parties went beyond those ID cards to say that these people should now have a voter ID, something else, for the purpose of voting. Esther Pereira says that's an additional requirement, and that an additional requirement could be an impediment to someone who is registered and would have a normal ID card. And so if somebody doesn't have this voter ID card, you shouldn't stop them from voting because they are registered. And that being so is evident by them having an ID card, which is like a receipt for registration, and or them swearing to an affidavit that the person before the election officials is indeed the person who is registered. So that's the Esther Pereira scenario. The chairperson is now trying to say, and people like Ralph Van Peran has joined in that chorus, that to go to have your fingerprints checked is an additional requirement. And so it flies in the face of the Esther Pereira case and the Constitution. Now, firstly, I want to say the Esther Pereira case is not binding law. It's not binding law because it's a decision at first instance. It was never appealed, and only cases that go to the CCJ become binding law.
Yes.
So that to twist the Pereira at me as if it's binding law is as if you are of the belief that I don't understand what our legal system calls for, or that the people at large don't understand what our legal system calls for. So it's the first point I want to make with the Esther Pereira. The second point I want to make is that when you go to register, you have your fingerprints taken. You produce your physical body to be registered. And you attach to that physical body a name, and you use fingerprints in that registration process to determine the feature of that person that could be checked to ensure the name and the person match at any subsequent time. Now, in my humble opinion, if you go to vote, what is required is that you can be determined to be the person who was registered. And there is no better way than determining that you are the person who's registered than by matching your physical feature, that biometric feature, in this instance, your fingerprint. It is not something additional. It is, in fact, flowing from the registration process, a natural continuum of determining your being, your fingerprints. You don't have to go and do something additional. You're turning up and they're saying, is it you? We have your prints, let's see. Yes, you're the person. And that is something that's applicable all over the world. Applicable all over the world. Now, in the argument that, well, it's additional, there is added contention that somebody might have lost a hand and therefore that person can be tested in terms of fingerprints. That somebody might have bruised his finger and so that person can be tested by virtue of fingerprints. Well, let me say this. That argument is more than applicable to ID cards. Because in Guyana, we do not as a matter of course, update ID cards with the facial feature. And and it's no public knowledge that after registration in 2008, and we are in 2025, that's 17 years, that most of the persons, particularly the younger people, their features are no longer the same. And so an ID card is not the good basis. One that is not renewed for identification. You already rely on the fact that the person has the card and call the name. But the facial identification is difficult. And anybody who is serious can only take out their own ID card, as I can take out mine. And as we have taken out JADIOs to show that you can't use that ID card for facial recognition. It becomes dated. And we had in fact discussed the need to periodically renew ID cards. So that if you argue that fingerprints can be problematic, I would respond that the margin of problems for fingerprints will not be equivalent to the margin of problems for facial recognition. Because facial recognition naturally changes over time.
Yeah, yeah.
Fingerprints don't naturally change. You got to be, you get injured or something like that. So the number of fingerprints that would turn up that way would be marginal compared with the flawed system of dated ID cards. But even in that instance, one can have mechanisms like an affidavit, like we presently have for ID cards, that says, I am one and the same person. Oh, that is a highly flawed arrangement. But I'm saying that in the circumstance of the fingerprints, one would have to have a mechanism. Someone who has lost his finger or someone who's damaged his finger. And that those cases are likely to be far less in terms of recognition than the plethora of ID cards that have become beyond recognition. So that turning up with your fingerprints simply means you have turned up. And you don't have to rely on some document and then human beings making the determination. The technology is there, the technology is being perfected across the globe that can say, yes, this is or is not. And I can't see any legal argument that says somebody turns up himself or herself and justifies that by a part of his being, physical being, that that's an additional requirement. That's an additional requirement. That now becomes, for me, a primary requirement. And the ID card and the affidavit, for me, those now become additional requirements if the fingerprint fails because of damage to one's fingers, because one might have lost a finger, then those become secondary for the fingerprint. There's nothing superior to the fingerprint in terms of personal identification.
Vincent Alexander taking us to school here tonight. You know, Vincent, you've clarified so much to me. When I first came to America, they give you your green card and you had it for years. And then at some point they tell you, you got to go in and renew your green card. And I remember saying, Bill, why do you want a thing, you know? And because it's another day, you got to take out a walk and go in and so on and thing. It makes sense now. That what I look like when I first came to America 38 years ago is not what I look like now. And so in renewing your green card, I think they do it now every 10 years, right? They're making allowance to that. You live and you learn, as old people would say, you know? Good evening to all of you who are joining us. Good evening to all of you who are joining us. And I think what Vincent is doing here tonight is breaking down so that when you all go out to make the argument for biometrics, you understand both the technical argument and the political argument. Because sometimes some of us have the political argument down, but the technical argument is where it's beating me. And that is why I like tonight's program, because it is linking the technical argument with the political argument. Because all of you all here are soldiers. All of you all here have to go out and to make that argument to our people so that because we're talking about asking people to lobby, to protest, they must know what they're protesting for. Somebody come on the picket line and ask you why we need biometrics, why fingerprints are important. You are able to explain it now. Vincent, thank you so much for that. Is there anything on this biometric issue that I've not asked you that you think is very important for us to know?
You know, in life, they normally say, leave well alone.
Okay.
Leave well alone. That commonsensical argument does not apply in this instance because all is not well.
All is not well.
We have evidence that in the absence of biometrics in terms of fingerprint identification, that the system has been penetrated and persons using their ID cards or an ID card or an affidavit have voted for persons who are not physically present. Biometrics, the use of the fingerprints, imposes a physical presence and eliminates the possibility of someone who is not physically present being voted for, as has occurred. And you know, we have GCOM has sent information for verification. And there can only be a reason why you send something for verification. That is because you want the authorized body to see what is the status quo. Authorized body has said that those names which were sent are names of persons, 80% plus, who were not in the country. And therefore, the logical deduction is that there were other persons who turned up to vote for them. We have not made the effort to do two things: to use all of those complaints and do a verification, as has happened with the first 3 sets. But we're arguing that we don't have authority over this matter. What's the authority the immigration officer has in law to provide GCOM periodically with a list of people who have not returned to the country? The law provides for that.
Law provides for that.
And so in a sense, when GCOM sent those things forward, we were using something, a law that was being observed in the breach. And there are those who say, well, that is not evidence. The court got to decide. Decide what? The law says that the chief immigration officer can make a determination of persons who have not been in the country at a particular time. And he has done that. So all is not well because there's evidence. And so we can't leave well alone.
We can't leave
well alone. We have to ensure that we make things well.
You know, the Trinidad, the head of the Trinidad Elections and Boundaries Commission, I think she had come to Guyana during the 2020 election, but I was listening an interview with her on some forum in Trinidad, and she said that what they do is that the immigration periodically provide them with information, and that the agencies that record deaths periodically feed them that information. They don't even have to request it. That they feed, and so their job of updating the list has been made easier because these agencies, I think, are mandated by law to periodically send debts to the Boundaries Commission this kind of information. So I just want to throw that in. Joelle is asking a question here. It's on the thing. She said, if your fingerprint is an additional requirement, why is it required for police clearance?
I think Joel's question is rhetorical.
Right.
Joel's question is rhetorical.
Yeah.
Joel is posing the answer.
The answer. That's right. Peter has a question here. How much time it takes to have a new picture taken and a new card issued?
That wouldn't take. Well, let me answer the question this way. What we had discussed was after a period of 5 to 7 years to have everyone renew their ID card with a new picture.
Mm-hmm.
That process of updating your ID cards from a registration perspective would probably take the nation 2 to 3 months, because it's like house registration.
Yeah.
But it is less tedious than registration because it's just the pic you're taking. That could be done in 2 to 3 months.
Let me ask you again to refresh for those who are joining us a little bit late. The chair did say that she's going to respond to your thing about fingerprints as a start to the process. When did she say that she will give a response?
She's now promised that response next week. I don't know whether
week.
it's Tuesday or Thursday, but she's promised a response to my proposition that in the improving GCOM system, period, that we start to do digital capture of fingerprints, because we cannot confute the fact that the manual capture of fingerprints does not provide us with a 100% guarantee of the fingerprints being flawless. Of the fingerprints being flawless.
Of the fingerprints being flawless. I was looking to see if there are more questions coming through. Vincent, look, thank you so much for tonight. This is not how we had planned the program, but given your first answer, and given what is being played out now, this has turned out to be a kind of a workshop for our people on this matter of biometrics. Somebody is saying it takes a maximum of 2 months at GCOM's offices. Rolly is saying that it takes 2 months at the GCOM offices to get your ID card and your pictures taken.
I said 2 to 3 months.
You said 2 to 3 months, right? So
I said 2 to 3 months.
Right. So you
yeah. We do not. The person who ever is saying 2 months is not saying so from a very informed perspective, because simply renewing your pics is not the same as a complete registration. Therefore, should not take as much time as a complete registration takes. We do have a system in GCOM for replacement of ID cards. And I put it to that person that presently replacement of ID cards does not take 2 months.
Does not take 2 months. There you go. Vincent, thank you very much. Any closing thoughts?
The public needs to be conscious. The public needs to be agitating, because what is at stake is the public's interests, free and fair elections.
Short and sweet. What a way to end. Thank you, Vincent. And in anticipation of the GCOM's chair response next week, Tuesday or Thursday, The invitation for next Thursday is being given here. Of course, I will remind you when we come close to it next week. Thank you again.
All things being equal, I will avail myself.
Thank you very much, my brother. What a program tonight. Today has been a long day for me. I started this morning with Norman Brown's program, and those of you who saw that program know what a fight we had on that program. Well, not a physical fight, but sometimes people come with agendas, and you can't. But anyhow, I started with that program, then I had to run off to teach back for this program, and I'll be on Mark Bench Shop later on tonight. So as an old a former colleague of mine used to say, David, when she's finished teaching, she said, well, David, I finished my 4th shift. They say we professors have to research. So I'm going home to start my 2nd shift. So I'm going now to start my 4th shift. Some days are like that. So I'll be on Mark Bench. I think he starts in another hour. Well, no, in another 45 minutes or so. For those of you who have not gotten tired of my face, or have gotten tired of my face, I will change my costume. I want to thank a couple of people for donations to Politics 101. I know Sister Campbell. Thank you very much. I know you gave a monthly contribution. Musai, I think I got that name right, for your monthly contribution. And also for Brother Samuel from Canada, who sent his contribution via Linda. Thank you very much. Linda, thank you very much. Samuel from Canada, thank you very much. And Musai, I think I may be getting Musai's name a little wrong, but I don't have my phone on the desk here so that I can't go through. And for those of you, the rest of you out there, please, if you remember and you can afford a contribution, please send it. If the contribution cannot be used for Politics 101 at the moment, I will make sure that I funnel your contribution to the WPA campaign fund. So either way, your contribution is welcome. Like I said again, we have some bills here on Politics 101. When we have finished paying the bills and what is left over, I will funnel it to, with your permission, to the WPA as a Politics 101 contribution to the WPA's campaign fund. Or I may divide it half and half to Politics 101 and half as a contribution, a Politics 101 contribution to the WPA campaign fund. Again, with your permission. If you want it to be just for Politics 101, I shall oblige. But as you know, on this program, we don't only raise for this program, but we raise for other causes. So your contributions will go to very good use. Thank you all again, and I'll see you all on Mark Bench Shop program in another half hour or so.